Listen, I need to tell you about what went down on Get Up this morning because, honestly, I wasn't even planning to watch the full episode. I was just going to catch the highlights later. But then, they started breaking down this 49ers-Seahawks divisional round matchup, and I couldn't turn it off. The panel was going deep, I'm talking film study level analysis, and by the end of the segment, I had a completely different perspective on how this game is actually going to play out. Everyone's been acting like the Seahawks have the 49ers number after what happened in Week 18, like San Francisco is just going to roll over and die in Seattle, but the crew on Get Up was laying out a blueprint for how Kyle Shanahan and the Niners can absolutely flip the script and potentially blow this game wide open if they make the right adjustment. And I'm not talking about minor tweaks. I'm talking about fundamental strategic shifts that could completely neutralize what Mike Macdonald's defense has been doing to them all season long. So here's how the whole conversation kicked off, and this is what immediately grabbed my attention. Mike Greenberg opened the segment by pointing out something that I don't think enough people are talking about, which is that this is an incredibly rare situation in the NFL, where one team has to play another team in back-to-back games. The Seahawks played the 49ers in Week 18, had the bye week, and now they're playing them again in the divisional round. That almost never happens at the professional level. The only time you see it is when the regular season schedule overlaps with the playoff matchups, exactly like this. Hey, what's up everyone? 1 second before we dive in, that like button right there, hit it now. Takes literally 1 second but makes a massive difference in growing this channel and reaching more fans. Just smash that like real quick. Every like pushes this video further, so do me that favor right now. Now, conventional wisdom would tell you that's an advantage for Seattle because they just dominated San Francisco, they've got all that fresh film, they know exactly what works against the Niners' offense and defense. But Dan Orlovsky, and this is where things got really interesting, he completely flipped that narrative on its head. He was arguing passionately that this situation actually gives Kyle Shanahan a massive advantage if he's willing to be creative and aggressive with his adjustments. His whole point was that Shanahan now has 2 weeks to study exactly what Mike Macdonald threw at him in Week 18, 2 weeks to diagnose why the 49ers offense completely fell apart, 2 weeks to scheme up counters and wrinkles that Macdonald won't be expecting. Orlovsky specifically mentioned how Mike Macdonald himself acknowledged the weirdness of this situation in his press conference this week. Macdonald said something like, "It's a little funky going against a team, 2 games in a row, we've got to do a great job of debriefing and having some answers knowing that Kyle Shanahan will have some stuff dialed up for us." And Orlovsky was like, yeah, Macdonald knows what's coming. He knows Shanahan is going to show up with a completely different game plan than what we saw in Week 18, because Shanahan can't afford to be predictable here. Then Mina Kimes jumped in, and she had done some really deep research on the historical matchup between Shanahan and Macdonald that I found absolutely fascinating. She pulled up the head-to-head record showing that Shanahan is 2-3 against Macdonald overall, going back to when Macdonald was the defensive coordinator in Baltimore during that Christmas game in 2023. But here's the really damning statistic she highlighted. Shanahan's offense is averaging only 4 points per game across those 5 matchups against Macdonald's defenses. 18.4! That's insanely low for an offensive mind who's supposed to be one of the best in the game. To put that in perspective, and Kimes really hammered this home, Shanahan's 49ers have averaged over 25 points per game in most seasons when he's been the head coach. They averaged nearly 30 points per game in 2019 when they went to the Super Bowl. They averaged 28.9 when they made it to the Super Bowl again in 2023. Even this season, which has been disappointing by their standards, they're still averaging 25.7 points per game, which is 10th in the NFL. So the fact that they drop all the way down to 18.4 against Macdonald tells you that Macdonald has figured out something fundamental about how to disrupt Shanahan's offensive scheme. The Get Up crew really dove into what makes Macdonald's defense so suffocating, and this is where the X's and O's breakdown got really technical, but also super enlightening. Rex Ryan was on the panel, And you know he loves talking defensive schemes. And he was geeking out over how McDonald uses disguise and post-snap rotation to completely mess with quarterbacks' pre-snap reads. McDonald will show you one look before the snap, make you think you know what coverage is coming, and then the entire defense rotates into something completely different the moment the ball is snapped. He'll show blitz and back out of it. He'll show two high safety and drop into single high. He'll walk linebackers up to the line and then drop them into coverage while bringing a defensive back on a delayed blitz. Ryan was saying that what makes this so difficult to deal with is that McDonald doesn't rely on blitzing to generate pressure. He loves four-man rushes with stunts and twists up front, which means he can keep 7 guys in coverage while still getting pressure on the quarterback with just his front 4. That's a nightmare scenario for any offense, because you can't really exploit the blitz with hot routes or quick throws when there is no blitz. You're forced to win with your offensive line blocking 4 rushers, and if your line can't hold up, which is exactly what happened in Week 18, your entire offense falls apart. Orlovsky was nodding along to all of this, and then he brought up the specific personnel that makes Seattle's defense so versatile and dangerous. He mentioned Ernest Jones, their linebacker, who they got in a trade and who's been absolutely phenomenal. He talked about Devin Witherspoon, their young cornerback who can play man coverage, zone coverage, press coverage, off coverage, basically whatever McDonald needs him to do in any given situation. He highlighted Boy Mayfield and Draymond Jones as guys up front who can win one-on-one matchups consistently. But the player Orlovsky kept coming back to was Rick Woolen, their big physical corner. And this is where the conversation shifted to what the 49ers need to do differently. Orlovsky brought up how in Week 1, when these teams played, the 49ers had their full complement of weapons, and they were able to attack Woolen and the Seattle secondary with multiple different looks. Ricky Pearsall, in particular, absolutely cooked Woolen in that game. Get Up actually showed some film clips of Pearsall running double moves, catching balls over the middle, making plays in the red zone, and Woolen just couldn't stay with him. Then Mina Kimes made a point that I thought was brilliant. She said that Seattle's defensive backs are actually afraid of Ricky Pearsall, and the reason is because, stylistically, he reminds them of their own guy, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Same body type, same smooth route running, same ability to separate in the intermediate game, same effectiveness in the red zone. When Seattle's defensive backs see Pearsall, they're basically seeing a version of their best receiver on the other side of the ball. And psychologically, that messes with them because they know how impossible JSN is to cover. The problem is that Pearsall got hurt and missed Week 18 entirely, which was a huge reason why the 49ers offense looked so anemic in that game. But the Get Up panel was reporting that Pearsall has a real chance to be back for the divisional round, and if he plays, that completely changes the dynamic of the matchup. Greeny actually said, and this was a bold statement, that if Ricky Pearsall plays, the 49ers have a legitimate chance to go into Seattle and win comfortably. Not just win, but win comfortably. That's how much of a difference maker they think he is for this offense. The conversation then shifted to the trenches, because ultimately, that's where the Week 18 game was decided. Seattle absolutely dominated up front, both in pass protection and in run blocking. The Get Up crew pulled up the stats, showing that Brock Purdy was pressured on 12 of 32 dropbacks in Week 18, which was a 38% pressure rate. That's the second highest he's faced all season. When Purdy was under pressure, he completed only 4 of 8 passes for 29 yards and was sacked 3 times. The offensive line just couldn't hold up against Seattle's front. Christian McCaffrey was equally ineffective on the ground. The panel showed how McCaffrey has been completely neutralized by Seattle this season. 22 carries across 2 games for only 92 yards, which works out to 3.1 yards per carry. He hasn't scored a single touchdown against them, and his longest run was just 13 yards. For a player of McCaffrey's caliber, those numbers are borderline embarrassing, and it speaks to how well Seattle's front 7 has been able to clog running lanes and rally to the ball. But here's where Get Up started laying out the blueprint for how the 49ers can fix these problems. And this is the part that really got me excited about San Francisco's chances. Orlovsky pointed out that the biggest difference between Week 1 and Week 18 was the presence of Trent Williams. In Week 1, when the 49ers had their All-Pro left tackle, they were able to run the ball effectively. The stats they showed were stark. When running behind Trent Williams in Week 1, the 49ers averaged 6.1 yards per carry over 7 attempts. In Week 18 without Williams, running behind backup Austin Pleasance, they averaged only 2.8 yards per carry. The panel was adamant that Trent Williams is going to play in the divisional round, and if he does, that single-handedly solves a huge portion of the 49ers' offensive line problem. Williams is one of the best tackles in football at creating movement in the run game and stonewalling edge rushers in pass protection. Having him back anchoring that left side means Purdy will have more time to throw, McCaffrey will have better running lanes, and the entire offense will function more smoothly. Ryan Fitzpatrick was also on the panel. I forgot to mention that earlier. And he brought up an interesting point about Seattle's interior defensive line. He was talking about how Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy have been absolutely dominant up the middle. And that's been the key to McDonald's defense shutting down opposing run games. They're powerful, they're quick, they play with great leverage, and they clog up the A and B gaps, which forces running backs to bounce everything outside where the linebackers and safeties can clean up. Fitzpatrick's point was that the 49ers need to scheme around that interior dominance rather than trying to overpower it. He was suggesting that Shanahan should use more outside zone concepts, more stretch plays, more misdirection to get the defense flowing the wrong way. He also mentioned how effective the 49ers have been historically with their fullback Kyle Juszczyk as a lead blocker. And maybe that's an adjustment they need to make more often, rather than trying to run straight ahead into Seattle's teeth. The conversation then pivoted to the passing game, and this is where things got really tactical. Kimes brought up Deebo Samuel and how surprisingly quiet he was in Week 18. Samuel is supposed to be the 49ers' most versatile weapon, a guy who can line up anywhere and create mismatches, but McDonald basically erased him from the game. The Get Up panel was discussing how Seattle used a lot of bracket coverage on Samuel, basically assigning 2 defenders to his area at all times and daring someone else to beat them. This is where the Demarcus Robinson discussion became really interesting. Apparently in the wild card round against the Eagles when Ricky Pearsall was out, the 49ers gave Robinson a much bigger role and he absolutely balled out. The stats they showed were impressive. 7 targets, 6 catches, 111 yards, and a touchdown including a 61-yard bomb early in the game. Robinson averaged over 18 yards per catch and made several crucial plays on Purdy's game-winning drive. Orlovsky was adamant that Shanahan needs to keep featuring Robinson even if Pearsall comes back, because Robinson has proven he can stretch the field vertically in ways that the 49ers desperately need against Seattle's too-high safety looks. When McDonald plays that shell coverage with 2 deep safety, you need receivers who can win on deep ball and make plays down the field. Robinson showed against Philadelphia that he can do that, and the Get Up crew was saying that needs to be a consistent part of the game plan against Seattle. Then they got into the George Kittle injury situation, which obviously is devastating for San Francisco. Kittle is not just their best tight end. He's one of the emotional leaders of the entire team, a guy whose energy and passion elevates everyone around him. Losing him for the divisional round is a massive blow. But Greenberg brought up Jake Tongs as a potential X-factor, and the panel really ran with that idea. The film they showed of Tongs was actually pretty impressive. He's got good size at 6'4", 240 pounds, he's a capable route runner, he has reliable hands, and he showed some clutch gene tendencies in the wildcard round. The legendary catch he made in Week 1 against Seattle, that improvisational play where Purdy bought time and threw it up for grabs, and Tongs came down with it to essentially seal the game, that established him as a player who can make big plays in this rivalry. Kimes made the point that the 49ers didn't really scheme for Tongs in the wildcard round because Kittle went down mid-game and there wasn't time to adjust the game plan. But now with a full week of preparation, Knowing that Tongs is going to be the starting tight end, Shanahan can design plays specifically to get him the ball in favorable matchups. Seattle's defense is incredible, but their weakness, if you can call it that, is covering athletic tight ends down the seam. That's an area the 49ers need to attack. The Get Up panel also spent a good amount of time discussing the Brock Purdy factor, and there were some interesting disagreements here. Some of the analysts were concerned about Purdy's performance in Week 18, where he only threw for 120 yards and looked completely out of sync. Others were pointing to his clutch gene, the fact that he's now 5-2 against Seattle in his career, that he's never lost in Seattle, that he had game-winning drives in both the wild card round and back in Week 1 against these same Seahawks. Fitzpatrick made a really good point about Purdy that I thought was spot on. He said that Purdy is at his best when the offensive line gives him time, and when he has his full complement of weapons available. In Week 18, he had neither. The line was getting destroyed, his receivers were limited, and he was basically playing hero ball, trying to make something out of nothing on every snap. But if Trent Williams is back, if Ricky Pearsall is healthy, if Debo and Ayuk are getting opportunities, Purdy has shown time and time again that he can execute Shanahan's offense at an elite level. The historical context they provided was also really interesting. They showed Shanahan's playoff record. He's 9-4 as the 49ers head coach in the postseason, which is actually excellent. They highlighted some of his best coaching performances. The comeback win against the Lions, where they were down 17 in the NFC Championship game. The road wins against Green Bay and Dallas in 2021. The wild card victory over the Eagles just last week. The point they were making is that Shanahan elevates his game in the playoffs, that he's willing to be more aggressive and creative when the stakes are highest. But they also acknowledged that this game against Seattle represents maybe the biggest coaching challenge of Shanahan's career. You're going up against a defensive coordinator in Mike Macdonald, who has clearly figured out how to slow down your offense. You're doing it with a depleted roster missing key players. You're doing it on the road in one of the loudest stadiums in football. And you're doing it against a team that just thoroughly dominated you 3 weeks ago. This is where Shanahan has to be at his absolute best. The Get Up panel kept using phrases like, "he needs to be in his bag," and "this is where the genius has to show up," and "if he wins this game, the game plan needs to go to Canton." They weren't exaggerating. If Shanahan can figure out how to beat McDonald's defense with this current 49ers roster, it would be one of the most impressive coaching performances we've seen in recent playoff history. Ryan brought up something interesting about how McDonald's defense, for all its sophistication, can be vulnerable to well-designed trick plays and misdirection. He mentioned how the 49ers ran that beautiful trick play against the Eagles in the wildcard round. I think it was a double reverse or something, and it went for a huge gain. The point Ryan was making is that when you're facing a defense that's as disciplined and assignment sound as Seattle's, sometimes you need to hit them with something completely out of the ordinary to knock them off balance. The panel was speculating about what kinds of wrinkles Shanahan might have prepared. Maybe it's more pre-snap motion to help Purdy identify the coverage. Maybe it's more play action to slow down Seattle's pass rush. Maybe it's designed quarterback runs to make the defense account for Purdy as a runner. Maybe it's some gadget plays with Debo taking direct snaps out of the backfield. The possibilities are endless when you have a creative mind like Shanahan calling plays. Orlovsky brought up the statistical matchup in terms of what happened in the first 2 games this season, and it really illustrated how dramatically different these matchups have been. In Week 1, the 49ers won 17-13 in a thriller. The offense started hot with a 90-yard touchdown drive on the opening possession, then went completely cold for 2.5 quarters, then rallied in the fourth quarter to pull out the win. Purdy threw 2 interceptions in that game, but he also made clutch throws when it mattered most. The defense came up huge with Nick Bosa's strip sack to seal the game. In Week 18, it was a completely different story. The 49ers were bullied in the trenches. They couldn't establish any rhythm offensively. They had under 200 yards of total offense at home, and they got dominated in time of possession. Seattle ran the ball 39 times for 180 yards, controlled the clock for nearly 38 minutes. and essentially imposed their will on San Francisco from start to finish. The question Greenberg posed to the panel was, which version of this matchup are we going to see in the divisional round? Is it going to be the competitive back-and-forth game from Week 1, or is it going to be the beatdown from Week 18? And the consensus answer from the Get Up crew was that it depends entirely on whether the 49ers make the necessary adjustments and whether they get their key players back healthy. Kimes made a really astute observation about playoff football and how much it's about execution rather than just X's and O's. She said that Mike McDonald is going to have a good game plan. That's a given. Kyle Shanahan is going to have a good game plan. That's also a given. The difference is going to come down to which team executes better in crucial moments. Can the 49ers' offensive line hold up when Seattle brings pressure? Can Purdy make the right reads against the disguised coverages? Can McCaffrey break tackles and create explosive plays? Can the receivers win their one-on-one matchups? Fitzpatrick added that special teams could be a huge factor that nobody's really talking about. He mentioned Jake Moody, the 49ers kicker, who's had an up-and-down season but made a crucial field goal in the wild-card round, in a game that could very well come down to a field goal. Having confidence in your kicker mattered. He also brought up the return game and how field position is going to be critical in a matchup between two good defenses. The Get Up panel wrapped up the segment by making predictions, and there was actually more optimism about the 49ers' chances than I expected. Orlovsky predicted a 49ers win, saying something like 27-20. He was basing that on his belief that Shanahan will have the right adjustments and that getting Trent Williams and potentially Ricky Pearsall back completely changes the game. Kimes was more conservative, predicting a close Seattle win, maybe 23-20. But she acknowledged that if Pearsall plays and is effective, she could see it going the other way. Ryan predicted a lower-scoring game, something like 20-17, with Seattle winning, based on his belief that both defenses are going to make it difficult to score points consistently. Greenberg didn't make a specific score prediction but said he thinks the 49ers have a much better chance than public perception suggests. And that wouldn't be shocked if they go into Seattle and win. What really stuck with me after watching that entire Get Up segment was the sense that this game is going to come down to coaching and adjustments more than raw talent. Both teams have good players, both teams have good schemes, both teams know each other incredibly well at this point. The team that wins is going to be the team whose coaching staff makes better in-game adjustments and whose players execute more consistently in high-pressure situations. For the 49ers specifically, the blueprint is clear based on everything discussed on Get Up. They need Trent Williams back to stabilize the offensive line. They need Ricky Pearsall back to give them another legitimate receiving threat who can attack Seattle's secondary. They need to feature Demarcus Robinson more to provide that vertical element. They need to scheme up ways to get Jake Tongs involved as a seam threat. They need Kyle Shanahan to be creative and aggressive with his play calling, willing to break tendency and hit Seattle with unexpected looks. And they need Brock Purdy to play with the clutch gene that he's shown throughout his career. If all of those things come together, the 49ers absolutely have the capability to go into Seattle and pull off what would be considered an upset, given how the Week 18 game went. The Get Up panel made a convincing case that San Francisco has significant advantages they can exploit if they make the right adjustments. The offensive line advantage with Trent Williams returning, the receiver advantage if Pearsall is healthy, the coaching advantage with Shanahan having 2 weeks to prepare, the quarterback advantage with Purdy's track record in Seattle. This isn't going to be a blowout either way. This is going to be a grinded-out playoff battle between two teams that know each other inside and out. But after watching Get Up break down all the matchups and adjustments, I'm way more bullish on the 49ers' chances than I was before. If they execute the game plan that the ESPN crew was outlining, if they get their key players back, if Shanahan is at his creative best, San Francisco can absolutely win this game. And honestly, based on everything I saw on that show this morning, I wouldn't be surprised if they do. The pieces are there for the 49ers to have a big advantage if they make these adjustments. Now it's just about whether they can actually execute when the lights are brightest and the stakes are highest.